So as we're looking at the wage base in this column, if they are just over $50, then $50 is what will be in this column. This one is calculated on all, so this will be the same number as the gross, right? And again, on your test, I'll never ask you what the percents are. I'll never ask you the wage base. I will give those to you so that you don't cloud up your brain with trying to remember those percents. You don't have to do that. And you'll have the federal income tax form for you to look at to pull off that number. State income tax, if we have one, is usually 1%, and you could have had your percent just written there. Good questions. All right, so our next calculation that we need to do is what is the employer responsible for?
The unemployment.
They're going to use the FUTA and the SUTA, and they're also going to match the FICA OASDI and the FICA Medicare. The top two numbers, that just came from the payroll register. Do you see those? $399.28, and look at the one that I gave you today, and the $93.39. Have to match it. Now, there wasn't a place just to write this down, but down below where your payroll register is, you have a lot of space. So you could write this calculation down there. How did we come up with the FUTA and the SUTA?
By multiplying Seaver's taxable income, which was 810 by
5.4, and the SUTA is the 0.8.
Yeah.
Was it 1 point?
Oh,
The Medicare was 1.45%, wasn't it?
SUTA is 5.4 and FUTA is 0.8%.
Was it 5.44 or 6.2?
6.2 altogether, so 5.4
Okay.
is SUTA and FUTA.
All right,
is
and here's the FICA Medicare. I think I have a sheet for that. And we only had one person, here it is, one person, and I think that was Paul. And there's the SUTA, the 5.4%. Was Paul's 810?
Where's the SUTA?
Oh, that's Medicare.
That's Medicaid, yeah.
Wait a minute. I pulled out the wrong one.
Don't confuse it.
My pages just got a little mixed up here. FICA OASDI. Here's the, sorry, there's the 0.8, and it was still the 810, which I think was the Paul Seaver. He was the only one.
Base limited.
Was 7. So at the bottom of your payroll register, I would just do those little calculations so that you have it. It doesn't go on the payroll register because the payroll register is just for the employee, but we still have to calculate what the employer has to pay. Now, when we're doing payroll, there are several calculations that we'll have to do before we can do the journal. That payroll register has to be complete.
I have a question.
And if you'll look at the payroll register that I gave you, this is the first journal entry that we have to make. Who had a question?
I do,
Okay.
but I think it was answering. It's once you hit that 7 for the year,
7,000.
the employer no longer has to pay unemployment for that employee.
Right.
Okay. That's why you're only calculating that last
On Paul
employee.
Seaver.
Okay.
He was the
I was
only
thinking
one.
that you just continue.
No, it's for the, and what month was that one? Was that October?
December.
Was December. So it's at the end of the year if we're using the calendar year. So most of our employees, unless it's a new employee, probably has already made that
Make that
7,000.
7,000.
But once they do, then we
the
don't have
employer
to
don't have to
calculate.
pay unemployment
Right.
for that one employee.
And
Okay.
I don't even remember whether it's still 7,000.
Make me a note.
We're going to use the 7,000 because our book shows that. So this is the first transaction that we will be doing. This transaction is to record the payroll for the pay period, whatever pay period it is, right? The two top numbers are from the last two columns on the payroll register that I gave you. Those are the expense amounts. Remember, we had a factory employee and we had an office employee. So for our factory, I called it production. It could be factory salaries expense. I don't think they gave us a chart of accounts on this one. 3,590. Does everybody see where that number's coming from on the payroll register that I gave you? Okay. The second one is the office salaries expense, and it was 2,850. That's coming from the payroll register, the last two columns. Now, could we have more than just two?
Yes.
Yes. We could have had salespeople. We could have had contracted people. We could have more than just the two. But it's the last columns on the payroll register. It's the gross amount. If you want to make just a little note there, that is the gross amount. Now we need to list every single item that we withheld from that check. So when we go back to where the deductions are, what did we have that we withheld first? I listed the federal income tax and the state income tax. Okay, federal income tax. Does everyone see where this number came from?
Yes.
796. Okay. Then we had state income tax. That was a calculation we had to do. Use the one that I gave you in case your numbers aren't correct. Okay. I'll try to make it a little bigger. Kind of distorts it just a little bit. Okay. The next one is the state income tax. Again, it's coming from the payroll register, 193.20. The OASDI, and notice I added the word payable to it because we collected it, but we haven't paid it yet, have we? So when we collect it, it becomes a liability.
Okay, what?
We collected it from their checks. We're holding it somewhere, but we haven't paid it yet, have we? So we have to pay it. It is a liability now because we collected it from our employees' checks. We haven't paid it yet. Don't take a picture of this, okay? It is it'll be on the video. The next one is the FICA OASDI payable and the FICA Medicare payable. Again, it's coming right from the payroll register. And I added the word payable to it because we have to put it into an account that is a liability that we will pay eventually. Union dues could have also had the word payable after it. Yes.
Okay.
And they didn't give us a chart of accounts, so we're sort of we had to kind of make up these names with our accounts. We did have wages and salaries, so the wages and salaries payable, I made it into one account. Could we have a wages payable and a salaries payable? Yes, we could.
It's how your chart
Okay.
account goes.
If we had a chart of accounts to go by and we had both, we would use both. What number does this represent?
The net pay?
The net. The net plus everything that we withheld equals the gross. Now that is a serious compound entry in the journal, isn't it? But it all came from the payroll register. So this is the first journal entry that we will make. Record the payroll for the period. Record. Is there any cash in there at all?
No.
What word do we have to have cash in the journal entry?
Cash.
Or the word paid,
Paid. Ah.
okay, or received. This is only to record the payroll for whatever pay period it is. Make sure that you have those numbers and they're all from the payroll register. And then I would just label that these two are the gross and that this one is the net. Our next transaction is to record the payroll taxes. Now, there's only a few transactions that you have to remember.
It's the best.
Record the payroll, record the payroll taxes. Who's paying this?
Employer.
This is what the employer is going to pay. Okay? Are they paying it yet?
No.
Because it doesn't have cash. It is just to record the payroll taxes. On your test, you will have record the payroll, record the payroll taxes. That's number 2. And then we'll have some transactions where I'll say you're paying, and then you'll have cash. Where did all of these numbers come from? This one is a total. Whoops. The top one is a total. That's called the payroll tax expense. So we don't have this number to get from anywhere. But the FICA OASDI payable came from the payroll register. The employer has to match what our employees paid. The FICA Medicare payable, they have to match it. What does the T account look like then for OASDI and Medicare? It's going to have 2 transactions for the exact amount, isn't it? When we post those. What the employee pays, what the employer pays. Then the employer also has to pay the SUTA and the FUTA. That was the little calculation that we did at the bottom of the payroll register. Employees don't pay that, only the employer. Add those up, and then that's our number that is the payroll tax expense. So this is transaction 2 when we're completing the payroll. Now this moves into chapter 8 because it's really hard to separate what we're doing in 7 with what we're doing in 8. The third transaction that we have, and when we go through the PowerPoint for chapter 8, we're going to talk about why companies have an account that's just called their payroll cash. Once everyone has cashed their check, or once everyone's
Money has to be in
deposit
that
has
payroll
gone
account.
through, what should be the balance in that payroll cash account then?
0.
It'll be 0. It's easy to reconcile that if it's separate from our regular cash. Now, which amount did I transfer from the cash account to the payroll cash?
We
It
use
was
the
the
salaries payable.
No, the net.
The net. Okay, the net amount. So this is transaction 3. The first one was to record the payroll. Second one was to record the payroll taxes. Third one is to transfer the money that we need to pay everyone.
So why wouldn't it be the gross? Because you have to pay,
That's gonna come up from somewhere
Yeah,
else.
that's all the money that our employees are
We'll
going to
just
take
pay
home.
those.
Well, yeah,
We
we'll
will
pay
pay those out of our regular cash. This is just what we're paying our employees.
Yeah, that's
And when
everything we're
everyone's
taking
check,
home.
when we used to actually issue checks, when everyone's check has cleared, then that will be a zero balance. It was easy to determine if someone said, I didn't get my check, or my check was lost, or it got lost in the mail. Now that we're doing electronic funds transfers, once all of those have processed, then that should be zero. If you have an odd amount that didn't get processed, there's still a balance in there, maybe something wasn't coded correctly. Maybe it didn't go to the correct account. Maybe the checking account was closed. You'll still have that balance in that checking account. It just makes it a little easier to reconcile. Plus, you might have a different person reconciling the payroll cash from the regular cash. How easy would it be to embezzle money if you're the person that reconciles both of those statements?
Real easy.
Very easy.
I just understood why.
Just
Not
makes,
add the net plus the employer's amount. Because that's probably not added to the quarter when they have to pay their taxes.
no, we'll calculate what's going to be paid when we do our forms.
That's later on.
Yeah, we still have a lot
I
to
just
cover.
haven't read that.
Remember, we only have 2 chapters that we're covering payroll. There is an entire 6 weeks class that you'll take on payroll. I'm only skimming the surface of the payroll. We'll know the transactions, record the payroll taxes, transfer the money, and then we're going to make our payments. Right? Here we're just transferred the funds. Here we've got the transaction to pay the payroll. Right, here's our wages and salaries payable, and it came out of the payroll cash. What should the balance be then in our payroll cash after we post that?
That's another.
0.
Should come out to a 0. All right, let's see if my computer's still booted up here.
This will be online, right?
It is.
Yeah.
There's several videos for 7 and 8. You could bring your headset next week if you want to, if you wanted to go back and watch some of those videos.
This is the one that
Short-term.
All right, let's continue then with chapter 8. We already did a little part of 8 when we were looking at the transactions. We're going to record the payroll and the payroll taxes. I showed you what those journal entries were. We're recording the FICA, OASDI, and Medicare, FUTA and SUTA, anything else that's withheld, and then we're going to do look at the W-2, the W-3, the 941, and the 940. This is what we just completed in chapter 7, the gross earnings, the employee withholding taxes, the net pay, and what the employer is responsible for. Remember the story of the school districts, and it will help you remember. It's the FICA, OASDI, and the Medicare. we now look at how businesses pay, record, and report these amounts. Here's just the payroll accounts that we're going to use. The T accounts can always help you, if you'll draw a T account, to see the amount that you're going to have in the Medicare and the OASDI account, because we're going to be posting to those two accounts twice, the one for the employee, the one for the employer. When we go to do our journal entries and we're not actually posting in that problem, it's always ×2 that will be recorded that when we make the payment. The T account will help you see that it is ×2. Here's just the rules of the debits and credits. That came directly from your book. It might just help you with the accounts that we're going to use with doing the payroll. If it's an expense account, its normal balance is on one side.
It's a
Debit. It's not an asset,
I
it's
mean,
on the debit
I meant to
side.
say debit.
And then all of our other accounts that have the word payable after them are liabilities, so they're on the credit side. We have payroll cash, which is an asset, and prepaid workers' compensation, if we are paying it ahead of time, that would also be an asset too, that we would have to make an adjustment for, but we do our adjustments. So you might just refresh your memory with where we increase an account, where we decrease an account. We increase an account on the normal balance side, so we have to know where the normal balance is, and we decrease an account opposite the normal balance. Record the salaries expense. Use that payroll register. The salaries, wages, expense is the gross salary, the last columns on the payroll register. The salaries and wages payable will be the net amount. That's the amount that we are actually giving to our employees. And then the amounts that are withheld are the liabilities. They have the word payable after them. There's just part of the payroll register. That one doesn't have as many columns as the one that you will not have, I don't think. There's the journal entry that we just looked at. The first two are the gross. I don't know, is that the same amount?
No.
Is it the same company? No. And then my description below that is to record the payroll for the pay period, and I listed what it was. That's exactly what we just looked at as we were finishing up the demo. The ones on the credit side added up to equal the ones on the debit. Can we go back and look at the payroll register and check every single number on that? Yes, okay. And when you're recording that entry on the test, don't say net down at the bottom and gross at the top. That's what it represents, but it actually has an account name. Okay, business scheduling or office salaries expense. This was cruise scheduling, right? So that will be our expense, and the other ones are our payables. The payroll tax expense is transaction number 2, and that's the recording of the payroll taxes. Now, on your test for the payroll, you're going to have numbers and accounts, account names. You'll record the payroll. You'll record the payroll taxes. Whose numbers are we using to record the payroll taxes? The employee or the employer? Employer. Okay. So my description down there, it says to record the payroll tax expense for the pay period and when it ended. Now, if it's a range, you could put that range on there, that's fine too. The OASDI and the Medicare, those we could check back on the payroll register because we're matching those. The FUTA and the SUTA, usually those are small numbers, if you have a really big number there, it's probably wrong. You probably have put the decimal point in the wrong place. So make sure that you check that before you submit your assignments to make sure that those are usually small numbers. And then the payroll tax expense, we need to add up the credits, and that should be the number that we list there for the payroll tax expense. Transaction number 2. This is why we use the payroll cash. I think that definition just came from the book, why we usually use a payroll cash. Do you have to? No. I just think it makes it a little bit easier to transfer that money. You're just transferring it into that special account, and it would be a credit to cash. Journal entry to transfer it is on the next slide, whatever that number is. Is that the gross or the net? Record the payment of the salaries. It's coming from our new account, payroll cash, and that's our wages and salaries payable. Is that the net, or is that the gross for all of our employees?
The net.
It's the net again. Remember, the gross is what we use for the expense. Now, I know that payroll can just seem like it's just a little overwhelming. It is the 2 hardest chapters that we have, but if you break it down into the little steps, it's not that bad, is it? I'm trying to give you the 5 transactions that you'll have for the payroll. We break it down into those steps, it's really not that difficult. Here's just an example of what a pay stub might look like. I don't get a real check anymore. If I want to look at this stuff, I have to go online to look at it. Does anybody actually still get a paycheck and the stuff is attached? Some people may, and that's just what's attached to, and I have to go in and print mine off if I want it. But it has all of the information that what you had on your W-2, how much you earned for this pay period, what your total is, total deductions, if you had any extra pay. The employer's quarterly federal tax return, which is the 941, taxes are withheld from the employee checks and are reported and paid to the specific levels of the government. We have to have an EIN, an employer identification number. It's similar to a social security number for that business. You have to have that number. We'll use that EIN to report the employee earnings and the payroll taxes that are withheld. It's your responsibility as the owner of a business to do that. If you don't pay those taxes, the IRS can come and just shut your pretty little business down. Right? They want their money, so it's your responsibility to do that. It's just a picture of what the form looks like to apply for an EIN. Now you can do that online. You probably still can do it on paper, but it's electronic now. Most things are. Just like submitting your taxes, you can do those electronically now. All right, here is the payroll register. This is travel. What is it? Travelwithus.com. We can use this worksheet so that we know this is the month of October, November, December. All of our earnings, the federal income tax, the taxable wages, the cumulative tax. This is everything that we need to complete the 941. And this was October, November, December. It's usually calculated by quarters. What quarter would that be?
Would be the last quarter.
The 4th quarter. So we'll need to do that 4 times during the year. When it's the first part of the year, then we don't have any totals that are carried over from that previous month if we're using the calendar year. This one, it's October, November, December, so we need to know that that is just the fourth quarter. It's going to be reported on the 941, and this is just a worksheet. If we were using Peachtree or QuickBooks, it could generate that for us, so we would actually have to be figuring all of those numbers. When we pay the federal income tax and the FICA, and when we're writing checks, we'll have some that will go to the state, some that will go to the federal government. And it's probably not a check anymore, it's probably just an electronic funds transfer. But we can combine those. And if we're a monthly depositor, it's due on the 15th day of every month. If the company owes less than $2,500, they can pay quarterly. Right, so we'll have to look in our problems to see when we're paying it. If you pay it monthly and you only had to pay it quarterly, I'm not going to mark off on that. I probably would pay it every month myself with the business, just so that I wouldn't forget that you had to pay that at the end of the quarter. And next class period, I will bring one of the calendars that I have that my parents give to their clients that tell them the days that they have to submit their payments. You don't want to miss one of those payments. If you're just paying, if you're paying every month, that's easy to do, but if you're paying every quarter, you want a little reminder. You can put that in your calendar to remind you that you need to make that payment. We use what's called a look-back period. If the employer pays less than $50,000 on the Form 941 taxes during that look-back period, it gives you a chance to look back to see what those payments were, to see whether it's a monthly or whether it's a quarterly payment that you have to make. It's a little complicated. If you paid every month, would that be a bad thing? No. But if it's not due until the quarter, you can wait until the quarter. Semi-weekly depositors, they deposit the taxes within 3 business days, and the employer pays more than $50,000 on that Form 941 taxes during that look-back period. So we have to do a little bit of checking from what we've done from month to month, from quarter to quarter, when we're submitting those. The journal entry to record the payment of the federal income tax and the FICA. Why can I combine all of those into
From
one
different.
trip?
One is unemployment, the other one is taxes.
Where are all of those going?
To the same place, to the,
Federal government.
Federal government. Now, could you make it separate?
yes.
Yeah.
You could, but if you're just doing one transfer and we're paying the OASDI and we're paying the Medicare and we're paying the federal income tax, we can do it in one transfer. Now, we're paying this. So if we go back and we look at the amounts that we had in the original entries, is this double the amount from that previous slide? Because what are we paying for? Employee and employer. Remember, employer has to match the FICA, the amount that we withheld from our employees' checks. We have to match it. Remember the school district story. They have an exemption for paying the OASDI, not on the Medicare, but the OASDI. The FIT payable, federal income tax, and then we're writing a check. So this is transaction number 4. Or actually, it's 5 because we paid the payroll, sorry. The employer's quarterly federal tax return, the 941, all employers have to fill that out. It records what we collected in the FICA, both of those, and the FIT taxes. If taxes are less than $2,500 for the calendar year, it's due by January 31st of the following year. If the taxes total more than $2,500 for the calendar year, we have to pay those every quarter. So depending on how large your business is, depends on how often they have to be paid. The 941, we'll do one of those. It looks a little complicated, but there's a place for us to write everything in, and we can get all of that information from the payroll register. I think when we look at the forms from the IRS, I think they're written on like a 7th or 8th grade level, and they're pretty clear with their
Yeah, what you want to do,
instructions.
what
It
number
tells
in
you,
here minus
yes.
the next 2 lines and put it in box C.
Right, it tells you exactly what to add or subtract and put it in whichever box, and every box is labeled. When we're doing this one, I like for you to go to the back side of the form to do part of it, and then come back and finish the first side of it. I think it makes it just a little bit easier. Paying the FUTA tax, if the tax owed for the calendar year is less than $500, the employer pays to the IRS by the end of January of the next year. If it's greater than $500, we have to pay it at the end of the month following the end of the calendar quarter. So we would have a month after the quarter to pay for that. In each case, a journal entry is recorded when we make a payment. So when the word payment is there to record the payment of the FUTA tax, then we'll have cash involved. Cash will be our credit. And then those other accounts have the word payable after them. Can we go back and check that FUTA payable number at the bottom of the payroll register where we calculated it? Yes. Okay. The 940, which is the employer's annual federal unemployment tax return, it's prepared at the end of the calendar year. It's filed, it has to be filed by January 31st of the following year. If taxes have to be paid in full, then the firm has until February 10th. And you just have to keep a tickler file to tell you, to remind you when those are due. You don't want to miss one of those payments. On your test, I'm not going to ask you what those specific dates are. I think that's a lot for you to have to remember. And that could change. You're going to get familiar with what you're doing with your business and meeting your dates. But you can see how detailed working the payroll can be to keep up with all of those dates. The 940 is calculated on the total wages, not the individual earnings. So it's the total for the business. There's a picture of the 941 front and back. Again, it tells you exactly what to do, where to get the number to fill it in. Paying the SUTA tax, we can't pay those together because this one goes to the state, the other one went to the federal. Typically due at the end of the month following each calendar quarter. And it's just the amount that we calculate at the bottom of the payroll register. If we have the workers' compensation insurance, and again, workers' comp, if you are keeping your employees hired and working, and you don't have a lot of people on workers' compensation, then your percent that you're paying could be a good percent, could be low. If you have a lot of people that are filing workers' compensation, that amount can go up. But that's, in most states, it is just paid by the employer, not by the employee. The W-2 is prepared by the employer each calendar year, provides the summary of the gross earnings and the deductions to each employee. It goes to the employee, the IRS. You usually get a pack of those that have maybe get 3 copies. Our last one that we got was not even a duplicate. It was just printed in an envelope. so I know that some of those forms are changing. It used to just be a short form, about a third of a page. Mine was a full sheet this last time, but that's what you have to have when you're filing your taxes, the W-2. When does your company have to give you your W-2?
It should be out by the 31st of January.
Of January. And one of the questions in the chapter was, if you're leaving a business, are they to give you your W-2 when you leave?
No. No. They have to wait till the 31st.
They can give it to you when
Yeah,
you leave.
yeah.
Because
But
what
they're
if you're
a big company,
moving?
then they're not-
What if you don't know what your address is? You're being terminated. So whatever your earnings are should be what's on that last month's check, whatever your last check was. So you can request it. Do they always give it to you?
No.
Because when do they usually print those? The end of the
Yeah.
year. Okay, so it's a little difficult. If you were doing a computerized system, I don't think it would be that difficult to print one for someone that they were leaving. There's just what the W-2, when it was a third of a piece of paper. Mine was just printed on a regular piece of printer paper, yeah, so. But it just has all the information that you need for your taxes. The W-3, transmittal of income and tax statements. Total amount of wages, tips, and compensation paid to employees. Total OASDI and Medicare taxes withheld. It's sent to the Social Security Administration with copies of each employee's W-2. So that's what the employer is responsible for submitting. There's a picture of what the W-3 would look like. And then we have a huge summary at the back of Chapter 8. All right, now remember, we are not going to be payroll experts when we finish chapters 7 and 8. This is not all there is to payroll.
I've done payroll, but I did all
Other stuff.
Let's look at the demo for chapter 8, and I'm passing down a journal. Journal pages coming down. A 941 is coming down. No, I had a paper clip on it for some reason. Couldn't get it on.
Would you give that to us first?
Okay, you should have a journal page, and then you should have a 941 that came down. The 941 should be front and back. Yes. Just 2 sheets.
Yeah.
our problem should be 8B4.
Three twenty-three.
323?
Yeah. Shit.
All right, in my book, it's on page 330. Yours might be 2 pages off. And it's Brown Sporting Goods,
Oh, not eight B4?
8B4.
Eight B4,
It should be Brown Sporting Goods.
yes I am. Sorry, I gave the wrong page.
All right, it says the following is the monthly payroll for the last 3 months of the year for Brown Sporting Goods Shop. 2 Boat Road, Lynn, Massachusetts, 01945. The shop is a sole proprietorship owned and operated by Bill Brown. The employer ID number for Brown Sporting Goods is 289311893. The employees at Brown's are paid once each month on the last day of the month. David Clark is the only employee who has contributed the maximum into Social Security. None of the other employees will reach the Social Security wage-based limit by the end of the year. Assume the rate for Social Security to be 6.2%, with the wage-based maximum of $106,800, and the rate for Medicare to be 1.45% on all earnings. Brown's is classified as a monthly depositor on Form 941 payroll tax deposit purposes. When is it due if it's monthly?
The 15th?
The 15th of the following month. Okay? Our tasks are going to be to journalize the entries to record the employer's payroll tax expense for each period in the general journal. 2, journalize the payment of each tax liability in the general journal. And 3, complete the Form 941 for the 4th quarter of the current year. So we have October, November, and December, and we have lots of information. They did the payroll register for us. And we didn't have to do that part, but in order to get those numbers, they had to do the payroll register. Okay, so that part was already taken care of. Our job is to journalize the entries to record the employer's payroll tax expense for each period. What does the employer have to pay looking at October? Not what the employee paid, but what does the employer have to pay?
10,300 and
Okay, we're just looking at October. What does the employer have to pay?
just the income tax, the federal income tax.
Like FICA or SDI and Medicare. employer's portion of it.
They have to match what the employee paid. What did all of the employees pay for October for OASDI and Medicare? Now, I'm thinking, you're looking at this and you're thinking, oh my gosh, I'll never figure out what numbers I'm supposed to use. There's so much information in here. But let's break it down just by the month. We're only looking at October right now. Don't feel overwhelmed by it. Yes, it's a little complicated. Yes, it's very detailed. But they've done part of the hard part for us. The payroll register is already done. We have the numbers there. The first entry was already prepared for us, and that's to record the payroll. We didn't have to do that part. The second part now is that we're recording the payroll taxes. That's the second entry. So we have the FICA, OASDI, and the FICA Medicare that we are matching what we withheld from the employees. What is the total amount for October for the OASDI?
$643.56.
$643.56. And what's the Medicare?
$150.51.
$150.51. Here's what our transaction should look like on the 31st. I'll see if I can't make it just a little bigger. I don't have my year up there, but you would have your year up there for the October 31st. It's payroll tax expense, and then it's those two amounts that came from the information from our problem, part of the payroll register. Now, if we were actually doing this for October, we would do 1, 2, and 3 for each one of those months. But I want us to do all of the same transaction 3 times, so it gives us a chance to practice. So we're going to do October, then November, then December. When you're doing your homework and you're just doing 1 month, you won't have, and realistically, you wouldn't have all 3 of the same transactions for October, November, December, one right after another. But repetition, I think, can help whenever you're learning something new. So we're going to do this same transaction now for November and for December. What is this transaction? What's the description on it?
Payroll taxes. Record employers.
Record the employer's payroll taxes. Okay? So let's look down at November. We're going to do the same transaction. What's the FICA OASDI and the FICA Medicare
For November,
for November?
the OASDI is $657.82.
$657.82. And what is the Medicare?
$153.85.
$153.85. Does everybody see where those numbers are coming from in the chart? Right, here's the transaction for November. Your description on this one is going to be the same. Record the employer's payroll tax. Then we have the last month of the quarter, which is December, and we're going to list the same transaction. Payroll tax expense, FICA OASDI, and FICA Medicare. And I just took the numbers from the payroll, partial payroll register that they gave us.
Is that a second two?
You should have the numbers in your chart.
I don't have my book either, so I'm just talking so I can get that. I don't carry my book.
That one's 72, this one's 22 and 50.
I was partially second guessing.
Now, we're not posting in this problem, but if we were posting, and remember, this is transaction 2. The first transaction would have been to record the payroll when that payroll register was finished. Somebody already did that for us. Okay? We're doing the second transaction, record the payroll taxes. When we look at the T accounts for the FICA, OASDI, and the FICA Medicare, if we went to that ledger account, we would see where we posted the one for the employee, and then the employer matched it. So when we get ready to pay this, we're going to pay what we withheld from the employee's check, plus what we, as the employer, will match. So I just gave you a picture of what that T account's going to look like because we didn't go through the process of posting. In this problem, we didn't do this part. This is transaction number 1. Record the payroll. We just finished 3 times for 3 months, transaction number 2, record the payroll taxes. Whose part is that, the payroll taxes? The employer. Okay? All right, so make a mental note or write it down somewhere, the transactions, because we'll always do them in order. Record the payroll taxes. So this is what the T account is going to look like after we've posted the first transaction and the second transaction. Now what does it tell us to do? The second step is to journalize the payment of each tax liability in the general journal. When do we pay October?
November 15th.
November 15th. All right, so I would just skip a line. I started back at the top. This one would actually be right underneath the one that you did for October. But again, I think repetition of the same transaction over and over again makes it a little bit easier. This is the payment for October. November 15th. We know we have to have cash, and we're going to pay the FICA OASDI payable, the Medicare payable, and the federal income tax. Where did I get the number for the federal income tax?
Adding it, or your,
Payroll register.
It's right there, isn't it? 1,494 in the book. Where did I get this number?
doubling up,
Doubled it. Doubled what the employee paid Because when we looked at the T account, the employee paid it, then the employer has to match it, the employer has to pay both. They're really only out the amount that they're paying because we withheld it from the employee's check. If we put it in that payable account, that means it's a liability, we have to pay it sometime in the future. The same with the Medicare, it's double the amount that we withheld. If you look at the 150.51, isn't that double from the payroll register? Right. And my description is deposit form 941 taxes. That's what we're paying there. Now, we haven't completed that 941 form yet, but we will. Okay, I gave you a little calculation at the bottom just to look at. You don't have to write that one down. It might help just to put it on the side that that is double the amount from the payroll register. Now, we'd be here for several more days if we had to post everything and finish the payroll register if we did all of those steps. You'll get to do all of the steps in Billy's Market 3 times. Okay? I'll give you lots of practice. And then you're going to ace the test. You saw the grades on this one. What was the highest one? A 97. I like good grades on the test. All right, let's, what?
98.
Was that the highest one, 98? I don't know, I erased it. I can't see what it is. All right, let's go to November. When do we pay November?
December 15th.
December 15th. Okay, we need to take out the federal income tax, the OASDI, and the Medicare, and we're going to double those amounts. All right, there's the transaction to pay the next month. When we're getting these more complicated transactions, make sure that